Good afternoon. Welcome to IPC Masterclass Biosafety Session 4. And we have very dynamic speaker, Dr. Saurabh Mati today. Before we start the presentation, I request you to pay attention to a 1.5 minute video by our sponsor. We are very thankful to Sanmed Healthcare for sponsoring this IPC Masterclass. Without their help, it could not be possible to offer such a series of master classes. Thanks, Sanmed Healthcare. With this, I hand over the sessions to Dr. Ranga Reddy, who is President of Infection Control Academy of India, to conduct the session of the day.
Very good evening, ladies and gentlemen, colleagues. A very warm welcome to all of you to IPC Masterclass Biosafety. As you all know, this is second series, and in the second series, this is the fourth session. I'm very happy today that we have Dr. Saurabh, who is going to take care of this session. Before actually we go into the session itself, let me actually very quickly brief you for those especially who are attending for the first time. This is a collaborative kind of program which is developed by Infection Control Academy along with University of Hyderabad with academic grant coming from Sanmed Healthcare. And this program was designed by Dr. T.V. Rao, Dr. Ranganathan Iyer, and myself with an objective to lower the risk of exposure at all levels in healthcare system, where biological agents may present a risk to workers, that is all of us, including the lab technicians, doctors, nurses, and various other specialists who are working within the healthcare system. I would not actually talk about the other objectives. Anyhow, you are all aware, and you are also aware of all the topics. The three other topics which have been covered by colleagues. They have done a wonderful job. I'm sure by now you would have definitely got a wealth of knowledge and information and practical tips for action within your healthcare institutions. And today, as in the beginning itself, I said that is going to be the fourth session, where Dr. Saurav is going to cover biosafety with class 3 and 4 pathogens and transportation of sample. As we all know, at the midst of COVID-19 pandemic, one of the major issues which is coming up is the collection and transportation of samples in a safe and secure manner so that neither we nor our colleagues or the people surrounding our healthcare institutions doesn't get affected or infected by the samples. So, before handing over the mic to Dr. Saurav, let me say a few very warm words in address of Dr. Saurav. He is a very dynamic and young and academically sound uh, with a lot of technological and technical fluency in infection prevention and control in general, but very specifically in matters related to the biosafety. He is currently handling the Department of Infection Prevention and Control at University of Neurosciences in Kolkata. As you all know, it is a premier neuroscience center, not only in the eastern part of India, but also all over India. It is a very prominent neurosciences institution. He has got several accolades, and he works closely with various organizations, including CAHO, HISI, IIMM. Of course, I would not. I am very happy that he is also part of Infection Control Academy, where he participates in several programs which are run by Infection Control Academy. With this brief, I would like to request Dr. Saurav to take the session. But before we move on to that, again, let me remind you that those people who are aspiring actually to get a certificate for the whole series, please ensure that you are going to do the participate in the quiz and do the assessment. And on your screen, you will be able to see the links to attempt those assessments. And one more thing, I am thankful to all the people from all over the world who have sent a great review of the IPC Masterclass. And I am very happy that the last few sessions we had the participants from about 15 countries in Middle East, Africa, and Asia specifically. And I'm thankful to all of them for their participation, their warm greetings, and also for a very, very positive kind of feedback what they have given. And some of them have raised a couple of points. One is because the English is not their native language, they have requested the speakers to go at a little slower pace so that they can understand, appreciate, and get the maximum benefit out of it. I would like to assure that it is going to be definitely taken care of, and in addition to that, all the videos and the presentations would be made available so that you can review post the session once again. So with these few words, let me now hand it over to Dr. Saurav. Dr. Saurav, mic is yours,
Yeah,
and looking forward to a great session again.
thank you, sir, for this beautiful introduction. Uh, our today's topic is biosafety with biosafety level 3 and 4 agent and transportation of sample. A very good afternoon to all the attendees. Before I begin, I would like to give a statutory warning that all characters and events in this show are based on reality and not fictional. Any resemblance or similarity to actual character or event is not therefore coincidental. And lectures are boring, but actually nobody is watching you. So with this, I begin. So my whole lecture would be based on these outlines. So actually, whether we really need biosafety or not, how can we handle it? How far can we handle? What are the agents? Can we bridge the gap? And how would we go beyond our capacity? So there is too much fuss about. So do we really need biosafety? We are having, this is the fourth master class. So we are having so much classes on this. So actually whether we need or not. So let's see. Actually the natural transmission, routes of transmission of infection is different in case of laboratory transmission. So in case of laboratory transmission, what is the most important is the inhalation of the infectious aerosols. This is the CDC data, which tells in about 50% it is evident. And other things which we bother most often, like spills, ingestion, parental inoculation, that comprise of very less than 20%. And if we analyze, 30% are still not documented. So aerosols remains an important transmission route. How does this aerosol generate? We generate this by our procedures. Suppose we am opening a lyophilized culture tube. We can see it can give rise to 86 visible bacterial colonies. Suppose we can have an accident, like I broke the lyophilized nutrient broth culture on the floor. At my nostril level, if I culture it, it would have 491 colonies. So it is very dangerous that we are actually generating the aerosols either by procedure or by accident. Suppose a Petri plate culture drops on floor. If we are sampled 4 feet above floor, it would have 9 colonies. And these bacterial colonies, these are cultivable and can be seen. But what cannot be seen are the uncultured, uncultivable and the virus. And these droplets generated by the aerosols have many diameters, and they have different evaporation and distance they travel. And our topic today is the biosafety level 3 and 4. So these are actually agents which are actually transmitted by aerosol and causes serious or potentially life-threatening diseases. So suppose if by aerosol generation I contract a disease, it is a very dangerous thing because there would be nothing to save me. And we can see this bacteria but not see this virus. Suppose I have a lab contamination, I have virus on my hand. Obviously, there will be losses due to surface contact, washing, but virus will be there in reduced quantity and can infect many secondary individuals. So how can we handle this serious issue with biosafety level 3 and 4 even? So it is purely by the safety culture. What is safety culture? It is a 5-pronged approach actually. We have to assess the risk. The risk assessment is very important because otherwise we would not happen to handle the safety culture. And good microbiological practices and procedures are the cornerstones. If we deviate, we will obviously invite some accidents or some life-threatening diseases. The standard operating procedures must be there for every procedures. Otherwise, any deviation would cause deviation and problem. And very importantly, there is training need. Not only induction, but a refresher training is also required. And apart from training, a mentoring is also required because we get fatigued. We tend to forget things. So mentoring is also required. And there should be a promptness of reporting, whether it's an incident or accident, so that corrective action can be taken easily. And we have these two things, safety equipment and facility design. What is the safety equipments or primary barrier? These are the barriers which protect the immediate environment and the worker. Suppose I am working in a biosafety cabinet. So it is a safety equipment. I am wearing personal protective equipment. So these are primary barriers. And it could be easily a centrifuge cap even, which can prevent spillage. Secondary barriers are barriers which prevent the pathogen outside the lab. So here the environmental thing is much more required. It could be a waste autoclave. Before discarding to the environment, we are autoclaving the waste and then handling to the biomedical waste handler. So this is the thing which can be a secondary barrier apart from the facility design, the biocontainment, these things. So here comes the first poll question.
So you can respond the poll using the tab there just below your mobile view of the slide. There is a options you can respond it, and I see people are responding now. We'll wait for 10 seconds only because this is a small questions. Good.
So in the meantime,
Okay, so just I'm publishing the poll now so that people can see the response. Everybody can see that. 89% people say false. Disinfection and decontamination are same, while 10%
okay.
say true. So I think before moving forward, Dr. Saurabh, if you comment there, that's better. Though it is already obvious.
Yeah, mostly these are actually very debated issue, but obviously these two are not just the same. I will come it after a few minutes in details, but these two are not same, at least to me, and with it 89% attendees. So how far can we handle? Let's see. We are very error prone. Our error can be of three types: rule-based, skill-based, or knowledge-based. Rule-based is where we are failing to follow the procedures, instruction, accidentally or purposefully. Suppose I forget to wear a gloves. So this is rule-based. Skill-based, that errors involve the motor skills, like handling a sharp, I get a sharp injury. Or it could be a knowledge-based, that due to the lack of knowledge or a wrong judgment call. Suppose I am identifying a pathogen as a not hazardous, but it will be hazardous. So these are actually error. To handle the biosafety level 3 and 4 agent, we should be minimize our errors. Because actually, if we by error generate the aerosol, what happens? In case of biosafety level 2 agent, this is a seasonal influenza, we can see in the lab 50% loss of containment can seed a laboratory acquired infection. 2% of this would seed a local outbreak, and that can seed a global pandemic. So it is very important that we contain it in our lab, otherwise it would not be possible. And it was a biosafety level 2 agent. What happens with the biosafety level 3 agent? It is very stringent. Only 0.5% of loss of containment can give rise to laboratory acquired infection and chains of local outbreak and pandemic. And this gain of function research actually limited up to BSL-3, but for BSL-4, it would definitely be a pandemic. And we have some regulations, but what happens, there is a general conflict between the lab scientists and biosafety officers because the regulations take time to be executed, and our knowledge is constantly evolving. So there is a definitely gap, but and with that is inevitable. And there are levels of containment, biosafety level 1, 2, 3, and 4. As we know, we come to see what are they. So, and then I come to the disinfection and decontamination. So disinfection actually aims at reducing the microbial load to avoid infections, while decontamination is an umbrella term actually. It comprises of sterilization, disinfection, antisepsis. So decontamination can aim as complete killing of all microbes. However, these are actually very relative terms because it depends on detection of live microbes that has its limits and dependent on the method used and microbe concerned. In the biosafety level 3 lab, surface decontamination is the primary means of decontamination, whereas in 4 it is both liquid disinfection and fumigation. And that's why during planning of these labs, the any penetration has to be sealed. For biosafety level 4, it has to be verified. Otherwise, the fumigation will not act. These are actually the agent commonly used for the fumigation. The formaldehyde and chlorine dioxide gas require high humidity, whether hydrogen peroxide vapor requires low humidity. And formaldehyde has many environmental and safety issues, requires 4-hour contact time, and hydrogen peroxide at least 1 hour. It is effective sporicidal, and chlorine dioxide is also good, but we have to eliminate the light sources. Some disinfection have very good action and can be accepted as sterilant, and other disinfectants we can see can be high, intermediate, or low. So these are actually required because to fight with the safety level 3 and 4 agent, these are often our weapons other than the barriers. So if we see, it is a very schematic diagram of the 4 levels of the labs. The basic minimum biosafety level 1, 2. On the left hand side, we can see the primary barriers. And on the right hand side, we see the secondary barriers. So it's very schematic. Primary barriers are mainly associated with our biosafety we are concerned with. And these secondary barriers actually required for the biosecurity. Higher the lab level, higher is the biosecurity, also the biosafety. What differs from biosafety level 2 and 3, the primary barriers almost same, but there are huge difference in the secondary barriers. Like it has to be physically separated, self-closing double door access, we have to have negative airflow, and no recirculation of the exhaust air. And biosafety cabinet is very much required in biosafety level 2 and 3. In the biosafety level 4, either we could have a cabinet based or suit based. In cabinet based, we have biosafety cabinet type 3, or suit based, we have biosafety cabinet 2 or 1 with full body positive air supply, positive pressure personnel suit. And for the biosecurity, it has to be a separate building or an isolated zone. It has to be dedicated supply and exhaust, and there should be vacuum and decontamination system functional. So ready for the second poll. I will have an engaging actually, which is not a primary barrier or safety equipment.
So the poll is on. Please respond with the option given here. Good. We are getting response and very diverse response we are getting. We'll show you
Definitely.
in 10 minutes time. Just I think participants may not be able to see the response right now, but very diverse response we are getting. Interesting to see that. Yeah, we'll allow more time to people to respond. Those people joining first time, you can see below the slides there are options to respond. You need to touch and respond. Good. So maybe another 10-second more. Oh, still coming. Fine. So I'm ending the poll and going to show you the response. Here is the response. 67% people responded that the waste autoclave, whereas 16% all the above, and 13% biosafety cabinet, 2% globes. Your comments, speaker.
Yeah, so as we know, the primary barriers will prevent the worker and the immediate environment. So biosafety cabinet will prevent, PPE will prevent, but waste autoclave is mainly for the biocontainment. So waste autoclave will be the right answer. So let's see into the biosafety level 3 facility. It is very important task actually and very tough task also. A very strong collaboration between regulatory bodies, engineering and planning authorities, fire department, and very importantly, the user is required. There has to be strict separation of virology and microbiology lab rooms. Water, we cannot flood the lab. So we have to have minimum tap and sink, and sensor on floor should be there to detect water, and every drainage water should go through the effluent treatment plant. The fire has to be very important. There is 90-minute burnout strategy, and for the sensor and exhaust of the smoke should be there. And sprinkler is a very debatable issue because sprinkler will again inevitably create the problem of flooding. So a rational approach is actually obtained, that is 70 degrees centigrade, very high, very large fire, then the sprinklers will act. Air is very important thing in biosafety level 3 as we see, and this negative pressure, air pressure should have a gradient that should decrease from the lock to the lab room. Incoming air should be HEPA through HEPA filter, and exhaust should be also through HEPA filter. And exhaust HEPA filter should be more efficient, at least H13 filter, because it would act for the biosecurity. And proper planning is required actually, because after discarding a HEPA filter, we have to bag it and put it in autoclave. Before that, we cannot throw it out. So the bagged filter must fit in the autoclave. The individual ventilation flaps has to be used. Otherwise, for changing one HEPA filter, I have to close whole lab. So that is not permissible. So individual ventilation flap is very much required. And filter integrity test is much important thing that has to be done annually. PPE is another important part of the biosafety level 3. Apart from the lab clothing, goggles, the usually the 3 pairs of gloves and or gauntlets are used. One short gloves, one lab coat sleeves. Then second are the larger gloves that can be put up to elbow on the second lab coat, and the short gloves for working within the biosafety cabinet only. We have to wear it within the cabinet and dispose of there. And for respiratory protection as needed, it could be a HEPA filtered positive pressure system plus hood, or N95 or FFP3 mask plus face shield. Very brief about the biosafety level 4. As I told, it could be cabinet line based or a suit based. Importantly is 5 square meter technical area is required per square meter lab space. So it is very huge technical expertise that is required for a biosafety level 4 facility designing. And if we see, the safety routine is very meticulous. We have authorized staff entry. They have to change the attire and activate personal communication device, put on safety suit, then entry through airlock, and 3 to 5 hour work is permitted, not more than that. That will cause fatigue. And after the work, they have to go through a chemical shower to decontaminate the suit, and then they can exit. So, which is not a biosafety level 3 agent, a pole is there.
The poll 3 is on now. You can respond the same way, looking at the below the slides. The options are here. Yes, we got this response. We are getting response very fast. And again, very diverse response, almost equal response to all four. Interesting. Yeah, we'll wait for a few seconds more because give some time to people to think and then respond. Okay. So still going on. So let's give more time now to respond people. 130 professionals from so many countries we see, including Sri Lanka. Just I got a mail from have been participating in this program. So I'm ending the poll in next 10 seconds. Great. Ending the poll, and the result is very diverse here. You see almost equally divided into both. 18% antivirus, anthrax 27%, Francilla 27%, and smallpox 27%. Our two Dr. Saurabh to make a remark on here.
Yeah, so this shows that actually the smallpox will be a biosafety level 4 agent. Other three are biosafety level 3 agent. So the smallpox will be the right answer, but this shows that even we are puzzled when the organism comes. So let's see what are these agents actually. The biosafety level 4 agents are very few. If we see the hemorrhagic fever viruses includes Ebola, Marburg, Lassa fever, Crimean Congo hemorrhagic virus, along with Hendra, Nipah, and smallpox or variola. And these virus agents actually for the biosafety level 4, the Ebola, Marburg, Lassa, they call hemorrhagic fever with exanthem, and are very contagious. We have seen the Ebola episodes, and we have seen the Nipah virus also, and the smallpox. It's a very dreaded kind of threat that is kept under biosecurity, but one accident occurred and the effect was very disastrous. We have seen it in the last week's webinar. And these biosafety level 3 agents, they are diverse. Some are bacteria, some virus, some fungi, all are there. Among the bacteria, the Mycobacterium tuberculosis, we fight it every day. Then Francisella tularensis, this causes tularemia. The Coxiella barnetti causes lymphadenopathy, Q fever, query fever. These are similar to causing tuberculosis actually, often misdiagnosed. And we have Burkholderia malii that cause glanders in horses. We have Burkholderia pseudomallei that cause melioidosis. That is again mimics tuberculosis, but if we are not able to diagnose it or treat properly, patient will surely die. And last week we observed that Bacillus anthracis is there. So it causes anthrax. And the bioterrorism we have seen sending the postal cards with anthrax spores. Then we have Yersinia pestis causing plague. We have rickettsia and brucella. Sorry for the disturbance. And we have many viruses. We can see our SARS coronavirus is also in there, and hantavirus, Rift Valley fever, equine encephalitis virus, the MERS, chikungunya, yellow fever, West Nile, all comes in the biosafety level 3. Among the biosafety level 3 fungi, there are blastomyces, coccidioides, and histoplasma. And why you are confused? Because the biosafety level 3 and 2, they can be mixed because particular work with one agent may require biosafety level 3 practices. Suppose I am working with HIV, a biosafety level 2 pathogen. But in the cell line research that needs biosafety level 3. So it is not actually the agent that matters, but our procedures also matters. What procedures or what things we have to follow. It could be a biosafety level 3 agent yellow fever virus, but if it is a vaccine strain, then we can handle it as BSL-2. Prions are handled at BSL level 2. Now we can see in the 50 years time span what are the laboratory record infection. It is the brucella that is in the rank 1 in 1930 to 78 and also 1979 to 2015. These are actually the documented infections. Real picture may be different, and we can see the Mycobacterium tuberculosis has risen from rank 6 to rank 2. And thanks to the vaccination drive, the hepatitis B virus has gone down. Coming to the smallpox variola, how we can tackle it? The items can be sterilized by dry heat, suppose normal hot air oven or a regular autoclaving, and can be disinfected very easily. But what happens is very dangerous and contagious. It can go through the aerosol, through the air. So we have to have fumigation for that and very strict biosecurity protocol. These arena viruses are very important and very dangerous. These include Lassa, Machupo, Guanarito, Chapare, Luzo, Junin, and Sabia. They are transmissible by contact with body fluids and airborne droplets. Disinfection is very important here because 1% bleach, 2% glutaraldehyde, 10% neutral buffer formalin. All are okay for it. And but we can see they survive in a stored blood sample for about 2 weeks at room temperature. And the Lassa virus gets inactivated by heating serum at 60 degrees centigrade for at least 1 hour. Very important are the necropsy samples. We have to fix it 10% neutral buffer saline formalin for 21 long days before they can be removed from biocontainment. Otherwise, we would spread the infection. These are very contagious, and actually PPE are not very much sufficient to prevent them. So biosafety cabinet and containment is very much required. We can see the cells grown on cover slip or in tissue culture plates. They have to be fixed with 10% neutral buffer formalin for full 24 hours. Before that, we cannot do with them. Filoviruses, they include the Marburg, Ravn, Bundibagyo, Ebola, Reston, Sudan, Thai forest, and Lovio virus. These are the enveloped arenavirus. And they being enveloped, they can be most easily destroyed with detergents, heat, irradiation, but that has to be proper. Otherwise, they will survive and infect others. The serum samples can be inactivated in 60 degrees centigrade with 60 to 75 minutes, but in combination with dodecyl sulfate and 2-in-20, it can be reduced to 15 minutes. Blood smear inactivation is very important in case of the filoviruses. It has to be exposed to methanol for 30 minutes and subsequent exposure to 90 to 100 degrees centigrade before discarding. Crimean Congo hemorrhagic fever virus is also enveloped, so can be easily disinfected with 70% ethyl alcohol or detergents. What happens? What is the problem with this biosafety level 4 agents? Because there is no specific treatment if a laboratory worker acquires infection. Ribavirin has some role in Lassa virus and query role in Crimean Congo hemorrhagic fever. In the smallpox, we are left with very few options like cidofovir and investigational agents and varicella immunoglobulin. The biosafety level 3 viruses we have seen, even our COVID-19 also, they are enveloped and disinfected with 70% ethyl alcohol and detergent. But it has to be very meticulous. Problematic are the biosafety level 3 bacteria. Here, the gram-negative bacteria can be best disinfected by 70% ethanol with proper contact time, and best decontamination can be done with 1% sodium hypochlorite, 4% formaldehyde, 2% glutaraldehyde, like these things. So even the threatening Burkholderia, Francisella, Rickettsia can be killed by this way. The plague bacilli, very reduced sodium hypochlorite solution is actually required to disinfect, only 0.5%. And chlorinated tap water is effective in killing the Yersinia pestis, but we have to apply it judiciously and proper timing has to be given. Suppose I have a skin contamination of Yersinia pestis, so I have to rigorously clean the skin with lots of water and soap, followed by 2-minute wash using skin antiseptic or 0.2% paracetic acid. Brucella is a very important thing which gets often overlooked. Some has even considered is at biosafety level 4 agent also, some as biosafety level 2 agent also. What happens, the tremendous aerosolization chance, and these are actually long incubation infection. So after being exposed, long time after, we can get to know that I was infected at that time. So there are chemical compositions, quaternary ammonium compounds that has to be there, and some this Brucella mimics tuberculosis. So some agents will have tuberculosis, anti-tuberculosis agent also, action also. The Q fever, the organism can be disinfected from surface and equipment with 10% formaldehyde, 4% glutaraldehyde, 3% hydrogen peroxide, or 1% paracetic acid, but contact time is 30 minutes. So it is long period that has to be provided for laboratory, and disinfection for skin can be done with 0.2% paracetic acid. Now, this is my query also in a poll question. What practice would you recommend if an unknown sample comes to you, whether it is biosafety level 1, 2, 3, or 4?
So there is an issue in this poll option. BSL 2 is not given here. But anyway, you respond it. An answer which is not given in option, you can always respond in the chat box. Good. We are getting response, and this time response is okay, slightly divided. So I'm ending the poll now, and the result is that BSL-3 got 55% response and BSL-4 got 40% response. Comments,
Yeah.
Dr. Saurabh. Yeah.
Because lot of people probably missed BSL level 2, that was not in the option. They have responded in the chat box, I can see. So this is very important question because I will come later. The anthrax bacilli is very important. It can be disinfected from the surface and equipment with 10% formaldehyde or 4% glutaraldehyde, 3% H2O2 or 1% peracetic acid. But here 2-hour incubation is actually required to kill it. Otherwise it would survive because it has the spores. And skin wound disinfection, lots of water and soap, followed by a 2-minute wash using 0.2% peracetic acid. Tuberculosis is very important threat, and probably working in lower biosafety level labs, people get infected with Mycobacterium tuberculosis. Its proper facility is not there. However, from the surface and equipment, it can be disinfected with sodium hypochlorite 5%, 2% glutaraldehyde. Ethanol 70% is effective against it only in suspension in absence of sputum, but not in presence of it. And povidone iodine is not as efficacious when the organism is dried on a surface compared with in suspension. So, but our facility is not upgraded and too basic. So can we bridge the gap? So here comes my poll question. All samples sent for routine diagnostic is infected with an unknown etiological agent. Standard practice is to follow the biosafety level 2 practice. 4 is usually not employed. Some lab employ biosafety level 3. But whether biosafety level 3 is efficacious or not, we can see the biosafety level 3 provides more biosecurity but no added protection to the staff. So it is usually and generally followed biosafety level 2. But base safeguard is always the good microbiological practice. If we deviate from it, we will invite danger. But we can keep our procedures judiciously minimum. If it is nucleic acid detection is there, I would do that first, wait for the result, and thereafter perform serological assays. For urgent serology, we have to follow biosafety level 3, or we have to inactivate the serum and follow biosafety level 2. Serum inactivation is generally 56 degrees centigrade for 30 to 45 minutes, but hemorrhagic fever virus may require 60 minutes even. So we have to standardize it. But what protects us actually? The material available for release and actual amount release are different. The biosafety cabinet has an operator protective factor of 10 to the power 5 for biosafety cabinet 1 and 2, and for 3 it is 10 to the power 6. The personal protective equipment, mainly respirators, have protective factor of 10. And if we control the aerosol production by avoiding the procedures, we can minimize it. So actually the clinical samples containing less amount of material and less concentration of pathogen, we are probably protected. That can seen in a Crimean Congo hemorrhagic fever virus program. We can see that people were not using gloves, had needle stick injuries. They got infected, but those who were using biosafety level 2 or even biosafety level 1 practices, they were not infected. So these things actually very important. The biosafety cabinet is the single most important thing that protects us much. We are very fascinated about the respirators. We can see the respirators protect us. The protection factor is 10, it is OSHA, and full face supplied air respirators provides best protection ascent protection factor of 10 to the power 3, and if in escape mode, it 10 to the power 4. We have this mask. Fit test is certainly required for certain mask, but we can see there is always an inward leakage rate. So these are actually things which we need to bother about for this agent. But my facility can't be upgraded, nor my workforce should face such danger. It shouldn't. So whether we can go beyond this, if a biosafety level 3 or 4 agent containing sample comes to my lab, what should I do? Not many lab are biosafety level 2 also, because there is a requirement that all medical colleges and universities has to have biosafety level 2 lab. But if it is not there, what can be done? Answer is very easy. We have to transport to appropriate facility. So this transportation of the samples comes here. It can be within your lab, even within a building, between buildings on same site, or an off-site transport. This 4 scenario will be there. Within a lab, suppose I am moving a sample from biosafety cabinet to an incubator. So I have to use seal containers, screw capped, no snap cap lids. That can lead to accidental spillage. We have to use deep-sided leak-proof trays or boxes of smooth impervious material that can be cleaned and disinfected. For using racks, vials, or tubes, trolleys can be used for stable transport. And if we are using trolley, we have to ensure that they are loaded so that substances cannot fall off. And always we have to keep ready our spill kit, because we cannot give time to spread. Transportation within a building, it has to be done through minimally through the communal areas and public thoroughfare. So it has to be very secure transit, and transfer container has to be labeled to identify their contents, and their surfaces has to be decontaminated before leaving the lab. The pneumatic air tube transport system is very much efficient and safe and rapid means in transporting the infectious substances around the site, but personnel at both the ends must be suitably trained to use it. Otherwise, the very purpose will be devastating, and this can lead to spillage and spread of infection. Between buildings on same site can be done in a sealable plastic bags, plastic screw top tubes, and locking plastic food storage containers. The redundant layers of packaging should be considered. Absorbent material should be used between the layers of packaging to absorb in case of leakage. The outermost transport container should be rigid. It can be a plastic lunchbox or small plastic ice chest. Now main problem comes when I have to transfer it off-site. So here all the regulations will come, because they are there to prevent the environment, public, workers, property from the harmful effects that may occur from the exposure. So 2 things are required: proper handling and hazard communication. These 2 things are very important. These are some of the regulations. We can see lots of regulations are there, and apart from the regular regulations, the import and export regulations will also be applicable for offsite transfer. Now for the offsite transfer, we have to categorize the infectious substances. If the material is sterile, neutralized or inactivated, environmental samples, or even a dried blood spot, these are actually exceptions. They do not subject to any transport regulations unless they are transported to other dangerous goods. But if they are not, if they are known, reasonably expected to contain a biological agent capable of causing severe disability, life-threatening or fatal illness, it is category A, both human or animal. If it is not, then we have to consider likelihood of containing of the things to cause illness. If it is very minimal, so these are termed as exempt human or animal specimen, they require basic triple packaging system. Otherwise, those who are not category A and not exempt will go to the category B, infectious substances. These are vis-a-vis category A and category B. We can see there are certain UN codes assigned, and triple packaging is required for all category A. In category B, we can see for 3291, that is category B, clinical or medical waste, there can be single package. Single packaging is acceptable, but otherwise triple packaging is required for category B. What is this triple layer packaging? The primary receptacle should be watertight, leak-proof receptacle. Secondary packaging should be watertight, leak-proof packaging. And third layer is the protective packaging. So these three layers consist of triple layer package. Now the last poll question. Triple layer packaging is mandatory for all category A and B infectious substances. True or false?
So very simple questions to respond quickly. And we are getting response, interesting response, 50-50. 50-50, wow, interesting.
Oh.
Almost 50-50, 50-56, 50-40, 47. Okay, so I'm ending the poll now, and the assembly looks divided. Yeah. Dr. Your comments, please. 53% people says true, 46% people says false.
Yeah, it is not mandatory because in category B, 3291 that requires single packaging is acceptable. So ideal answer would be false. So this how a category A infectious substance packaging looks like. This triple packaging will look very same for category A and B, but what will be different is the specifications. Each surface of the external dimension of the packaging must be 100 millimeter or 3.9 inches or more. The complete package must pass through specific performance tests like drop test, water spray test, and pressure withstanding test. And it has to withstand temperature of -40 degrees centigrade to 55 degrees centigrade without leakage. So otherwise it would be just devastation or leakage will be there. In category B, infectious substances, in triple layer package, this looks same. What depends is that it could the smaller packages can be done, but at least one surface should be square with 100 by 100. And these specifications are less stringent than category A. So by the end of the day, the goals are very simple: safety and security. For our purpose, it is biosafety and biosecurity. And today is World Social Media Day. So we are very concerned about our safety and security over social media also. And we are enjoying this webinar through our social media even. So we have to keep these two things very importantly in our mind: safety and security. So we have to follow the lab practices, safe lab practices, and don't want to spread the germs. We have to leave our experiment inside the lab. So you can, and everyone can stay healthy outside the lab. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Saurav, for a very interesting presentation. Definitely, it is going to help a lot of our colleagues, especially in the midst of current COVID-19 pandemic, uh, to deal with all the sampling and also the transportation and very safe handling of them. We are all aware that, BSL level 3 and 4 kind of labs are very few and far in India at the moment. MCI has very recently has come up with, the government of India has come up very recently with an idea to establish BSL2 laboratories in all teaching hospitals and medical colleges. But in any case, I think, being aware of the practices, being aware of the safety practices is definitely going to play a very vital role in ensuring that, we are not going to cause the harm to our patients and to ourselves and to our colleagues who are surrounding within the healthcare institutions. I think, we have some 5 to 10 minutes time left. Maybe, we should effectively use that in order to answer at least a few of the questions. Are you okay, Dr. Saurav, to take few
Yeah,
questions?
yeah.
Mr. Pranav, can you actually, help us bringing those questions to the fore?
Sure. So first off, compliment to Dr. Saurav. We have you are getting a lot of compliment from the participant and the speaker. Dr. Savita responded. Dr. Saurav opened our eyes to so much information we didn't know about BSL 3 and 4, and there is so many comments there. The questions I have picked a few questions here for you, starting one by one. Vaishali asks about which is most commonly used method for fumigation of BSL2 lab. Dr. Saurav? I think his picture looks freezed. I don't know whether he's able to. Yeah, Dr. Saurav, should I repeat the question?
Yeah. Now I can hear.
Okay, perfect. Question from Vaishali is which is most commonly used method for fumigation of BSL2 lab?
For BSL2 lab, fumigation is actually not required. We stress on the surface decontamination.
Okay. Vidya Raj want to know about what are the difference between GP3 and GP4 organism?
Probably they are referring to the CDC group 3 and group 4. They are bioterror agent actually. So biosafety level categorization is completely different for bioterrorism agents, because bioterrorism agent they can be used to transmit the infection through easily available routes. But for the biosafety level agents, they have been categorized typically based on aerosolization potential. All bioterror agents are not aerosolizable. So there happens to difference in the group 3, 4 with the CDC and this biosafety level.
Sangeeta Kitty wants to know what is the skin disinfection protocol for COVID sample?
For the skin disinfection.
What is the skin disinfection protocol for COVID sample?
Skin.
For sample or skin?
Skin.
For skin exposure, it is 70% alcohol, and soap and water. That is sufficient enough.
Okay, we have comments, many comments actually. Professor TV Rao put, which Dr. Rangareddy also talked about, that MCI has made mandatory now for BS2. Very few institutes, including medical college, have BS3, and not even medical college have, right? So the question Professor T. Rao asks here is that how to go about it, because it is not available.
Yeah, mostly the biosafety level 1, if we see, it has very basic structure. We have an open bench level and open tap or sink. To upgrade to biosafety level 2, we require a biosafety cabinet. That is very must, along with PPE, and waste autoclave has to be there to contain the infection within the lab. So there are regulations, and that is very debatable issue how we can go. But if we follow the standard microbiological processes and procedures, it requires a planning, but definitely we will be able to go through biosafety level 1 to 2 in most of the things. One important drawback could be our mindset and our workforce, our lack of training. I think this lack of training is one thing. We should focus more on training, because that is a very neglected part. And not only induction training, it has to be continuous training. Otherwise, we would be lacking to go through the biosafety level 2 requirement. And that is, I think.
Dr. Sachin Devrakar has a comments. He writes that we should not use pneumatic transport system for transport of samples from suspected COVID-19 case. He further writes that, but in case of SARS-CoV-2, pneumatic air transport system should be used. This is the comments. Let me see if any new questions is here. Yeah, I see. Vidya Raj asks, what is biosafety 3 plus level?
So actually the plus levels are somewhat if we cannot match the required next level. So in between is the biosafety level 3 plus level. For the biosafety level 4, as I told, there are certain requirements. We have to have our personal communication system functional. We have to wear the positive pressure suit. We have to have decontamination system. If we lack any of them, so it would not become biosafety level 4. We have progressed from biosafety level 3, so it will consist of considered as biosafety level 3 plus.
Right. Professor TV Rao here again. Where are the training centers in India to train to work with BS4?
Sadly, this is very lacking part on us. There are not much training centers, very few are there. One is NIV Pune, they give training, but that is not accessible to all. But I think the IFCAI can have an opinion and can an initiative on this, so that we can patent training to the needy ones, the safety training to the workers.
Dr. A. Revant Kumar writes, this could be a very basic questions, but may you describe how to sanitize various surfaces from COVID-19?
See, the COVID-19, we can see it's a biosafety level 3 agent, but surface decontamination is very much thoroughly have to do. Otherwise, the plain, whatever disinfectant you are using at your desk, 1% hypochlorite is good enough to kill them. The soap and water that can be used, and higher disinfectant can be used to kill also. But whatever you are using, you have to use it meticulously and for a minimum contact time. It could be 2 minutes, it could be 10 minutes, depending upon the concentration you are using. So, for equipment, usually we use 70% alcohol. The alcohol wipes are there, so it is better to use them, as it is very easy to discard them also.
Mhm. So Funit Kumar Gupta writes, do you really require fumigation or water fogging in laboratory?
Hello, what I missed the question.
Do we really require fumigation or better fogging in laboratory? So I think compare it to fumigation and fogging.
So that is the thing. Fumigation, why would be required? It is for the air disinfection of the air, and fumigation is an statutory requirement for the biosafety level 4 labs. If we have biosafety cabinet in place, we have our microbiological procedures within standardized, then we would not require fumigation probably.
Mhm.
Whatever we require is meticulous surface decontamination for up to level biosafety level 3.
Maybe last question from Dr. Alka Singh. She's asking, is fumigation with formaldehyde still recommended?
It is a recommended agent, but there are environmental and safety issues. So it is being banned, and as we have less toxic alternatives available, so we will be using that only. Hydrogen peroxide, it is taking very less time, 1 hour time. For the formaldehyde will require at least 4 hours. So time is very precious to us, and also efficacy and the safety. So that is the thing. Formaldehyde is being rolled away.
I think we have overshot by a couple of minutes, but I think there are a lot of people who probably are trying to catch up to go to homes or leave the hospitals. So thank you very much, Dr. Saurav, for a very wonderful presentation. I think it's very comprehensive. And talking about your suggestion for IFCAI to look into the kind of training, definitely, it is our endeavor, and the whole purpose of this particular series is to start actually stimulating actually the concerned people in the right direction. I think we will take it to the next level. But as we know that BSL4, especially labs, and especially concerning with anything viral things, it is within the purview of the government. It cannot be done in the private or even the voluntary organizations cannot take it up. But we will be very closely coordinating with governmental organizations, uh, pitching, our suggestions in order to establish the training centers, maybe in Kasoli, where there is another lab, or the newly setting up labs in a couple of states, like Andhra Pradesh recently got one of the virology centers. So maybe we would start actually talking to the government organizations in order to create that awareness, and also create that kind of pressure in order to widen the scope of training, and creating the right kind of manpower, or human resources to handle the biosecurity and the biosafety of the future India. And definitely, COVID-19 has shown that we need more of these labs. We need more of this awareness. We need more of the people who can actually not only contain but also give the guidance in these kind of pandemics, and probably the possible bioterrorist attacks which may happen in the future. Definitely, we will work towards that with specialists like you and many others. Let us actually keep moving to make our labs safer, our hospitals safer, and our patients safer. Thank you very
And
much.
most importantly, our healthcare
Absolutely,
workers.
absolutely. So just before actually we part our ways, I request once again all the participants, uh, keep spreading the word. uh, do definitely visit the YouTube channel where you can actually access all the presentations which are made. They are definitely going to be helpful. Keep actually, registering rather than just viewing, because when you are viewing, we won't be able to capture whether you are there or not. So certainly you please register yourself so that we know that, and also we help you with the future announcements and material, whatever are going to be prepared by our volunteers. So shall look forward to welcome you again for the next session. And the next session is going to be taken by Dr. Sukanya, and it is going to be on July 7th. Definitely look forward to welcome you all. Please do spread the word so that maximum number of people can benefit from this endeavor. Thank you and namaste. Stay safe.